Margaret's Legacies is your campaign. Thank you, Siobhan.
Yeah.
The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Pedicabs London Bill, Lords. Second reading.
Whip to say now?
Now.
Minister to move second reading.
Well, thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It is a pleasure and a privilege to move this Pedicabs London Bill, which tackles an issue that has plagued London's roads for far too long. This bill has, without a shadow of a doubt, a very long and checkered history to get to this place, and legislators have been calling for legislation on this particular issue for over 20 years. It is unquestionably the case that in 2011 the Law Commission commenced its 11th programme of law reform, which included a review of the legal framework relating to this space. That was published on the 23rd of May 2014, which recommended bringing pedicabs clearly within the scope of taxi and private hire regulation. There has been support from successive mayors for regulation in this particular space. The present Mayor of London, the previous mayors of London, Mr Boris Johnson in 2012 called for TfL to have the powers to remove pedicabs that do not meet rigorous safety and licensing standards, and subsequent to that an independent task and finish group on taxi and private hire vehicle licensing was commissioned by the government in September 2017. I'll give way, of course, to my own friend.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and he's making a very, very good point about the support that has been across parties, whether it's Labour Mayor or Conservative Mayor. But also, does he agree with me that it's also important to recognise that the pedicab industry also calls for proper regulation? And the London Pedicabs Operators Association wrote to me and said, in accord with the universal view that pedicabs must be fairly and appropriately regulated fast. Does he agree with me it's important to do it now?
So anybody who has seen this particular problem on the streets of London will accept entirely that there is a clear demand from the public for pedicabs, that there are organisations who want to have regulated, safe pedicabs on the streets of London. She is right to make the point that the industry wish to be regulated so that the good actors can be supported and people can have trust in this particular industry, albeit is small, but also that the rogue actors, and I'm going to come on to them in a bit more detail, should be not only discouraged but prevented from operating in this particular way. And we have to be blunt about some of the particular examples, and this has a significant and real impact upon the tourist industry in this country. It has a significant impact on women's health in particular, but also general members of the public, and it has a significant real impact upon the potential commission of crime. I mean, some of the worst examples include a tourist charged more than £450 for a 7-minute, 1.3-mile journey with their 2 children. Another charged £500 for a 10-minute journey between Mayfair and Soho. And one hit with a £180 bill for a 3-minute journey. Fortunately, on that occasion, the driver individually was ordered to return the money by local police and Westminster Council. And the honest truth is, there has been the Task and Finish group have been seeking a place for a safe and responsible pedicab train. And the quote that is set out in the House of Commons guidance, for example, says, "There has been much justified criticism in recent years of rogue pedicab operators taking advantages of tourists with excessive charges and absence of safety checks. It is not acceptable that Transport for London is unable to regulate pedicabs to ensure a safe service. The government announced in 2016 that it would rectify this, and the legislation should be brought forward as soon as possible." That is in 2018. Subsequent to that, the government made in 2019 it crystal clear that it supported the bill. And there have been various attempts to bring this matter forward, and let's be blunt, this is a very thin bill, dealing with a very small and niche issue, but something that genuinely does matter. And this is traditionally something that is often done by way of a private member's bill. and various colleagues have tried to bring this matter forward by way of a private member's bill, starting with my honourable friend from Sutton and Chene. Well, seeing as I've just named him, I will be delighted to give way.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way, and he's making an excellent speech, as ever. Will he agree with me that with the fact that the Mayor, the Council, residents, businesses, Parliament largely, and the pedicab industry themselves agree with just changing simply a 19th century legislative anomaly to have the only form of public transport in London that is not regulated to come under that banner? This should and could have been done years ago, and it should be done easily now.
Well, he will know that these pedicabs are effectively stage carriages under the Metropolitan Public Carriage Act of 1869, with which we're all deeply familiar, I'm quite sure. But it does mean that they are the only unregulated public transport operating on London's roads. He is right to highlight that this has cross-party support across London in a variety of mayors and particular local authorities. It has the support of the business industry. It has the support of those who want to be a regulated pedicab industry. And genuinely, I believe, with respect, that we need a situation where a tourist to London should step into one of the pedicabs and they should not face a risk of a unauthorised or inappropriate, is a better way to put it, fare, an unlicensed driver who has had no background checks, and a vehicle potentially with no safety standards. That sadly has been the case on a fairly regular basis. Of course I will.
Would it not have happened much earlier that we had a regulatory regime if the London Taxi Drivers Association had not been campaigning openly and publicly for banning pedicabs altogether rather than regulating them?
Minister.
Well, I say with real genuine respect for my honourable friend, who I was his whip for a while, who clearly has very strong views on these matters, I don't necessarily think the fact that the London taxis may have a view that having an unregulated provider on the streets of London, who are clearly in some sad cases abusing tourists and giving a very bad reputation and name, ripping people off to the tune of £500 for a couple of minutes' journey, is not something that is giving a good image of London. And genuinely, with no disrespect to him, there have been attempts to do this by way of private members' bills, which is, let's be honest, how much of this small legislation is dealt with in this place under successive governments. And it is not the case that the taxi drivers have anything fundamentally to fear from a regulated pedicab business, because the regulated pedicabs exist in other cities. It is not the case that anybody is trying to take away unfair competition. But the taxi drivers are regulated in a perfectly appropriate way by successive governments on a cross-party basis. And we want them to continue to thrive, to exist, and to provide the service they do to Londoners and tourists alike. But
Can I come back?
of course you can.
I'm grateful to the Minister. Is he aware that at a meeting with licensed taxi drivers at City Hall on the 17th of January 2004, Bob Oddie referred to the video which had been produced by the London Taxi Drivers Association, Ban Not Licensed, and the LTDA were campaigning not for registration of pedicabs but for a complete ban? Can the government commit itself to ensuring that pedicabs are not regulated out of existence?
So there's quite a lot to unpick from 20 years ago from that particular question, but I will do my best. So the long and the short of it is, the fundamental is the government does not want to regulate any particular part of the sector out of existence. In fact, they exist elsewhere. That's the first point. Secondly, I'm absolutely confident one can have a situation where someone can be charged an appropriate fee for what is a physical activity. This is not simple stuff to cycle someone around even the flattish streets of London, and get a proper return for one's endeavours, but at the same stage for it not to be £500 for 5 minutes. Now, one is perfectly able to have a situation where we create a proper market where there is some safety checks in the usual way without this being something that does not continue to exist. And in fact, the point is answered by my honourable friend for the City of Westminster, because, as she rightly points out, there are a number of users of pedicabs who want to get rid of the bad actors so that they can thrive. Now, there is nothing fundamentally wrong with that. There really is not. And there is space in the great city of London for the black cab industry, the private motor vehicle industry in the form of private hire, and pedicabs. All three can and should coexist, along with all the buses, the tubes, and the like.
Will the Minister give way?
I will, of course.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and I agree with him in terms of the mixture of transport modes we are able to enjoy in London, which we should be able to enjoy across the rest of the city and across the rest of the nation. Having served on the London Assembly and maybe bringing it back forward to the last few years, as opposed to 2004, when I chaired the Transport Committee in 2017, one of the issues we looked at was accessibility and making sure we have access to different transport modes in the capital. And does the Minister agree that by bringing forward and helping TfL to set the regulation, we will have pedicabs that are licensed with clear operators, allowing for a licence duration, allowing for a fee suspension, allowing for clear charging, which will help pedicabs add to the transport mix and modes in London?
Well, I think it's hard to disagree with the points that the Honourable Lady has set forward. And I accept that my honourable friend for Christchurch has concerns, and I want to try and address some of those points. But this is not something that one side of the House is seeking. It is all sides of the House are seeking. And successive mayors, including Mr Boris Johnson, late of this parish, it was very enthusiastically supporting. And I accept entirely that some may have their concerns about Transport for London as not being part of the government as such, but this is something that successive mayors of different political persuasions have been happy for TfL to run this appropriate regulation. And she touches on a variety of points, but clearly there are other issues, whether it is to the noise, whether it is to the persistent and ongoing blocking of footpaths, which has significant issues for accessibility. There's no question whatsoever. And the general causing of nuisance. But without a shadow of a doubt, there are plentiful examples to show why this has been called for on a repeat basis. There are plentiful examples why government really should act in this particular space. Attempts have been able... I will, of course.
I'm not against this bill, but I just want to be reassured, genuinely, because I'm not the sort of Conservative that really believes in more regulation, particularly of young entrepreneurs providing a service for tourists, quite a very simple service. So can he assure me that when this regulation comes in, it will be a very light touch and not onerous, so we don't sort of kill this young and perfectly acceptable industry? I'm perfectly happy to be reassured. I just wanted him to do that for me.
The answer is yes and yes. And I think that surely the key point is that some of the players already in the market, there are, it's hard to be precise because this is a totally unregulated market, as to how many people are providing this on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, but it's in the several hundreds rather than the thousands in London. But those who wish to take it seriously and do it properly and to do this are unquestionably seeking to continue this and feel that they can run a young entrepreneurial business with proper reputation, with the right amount of enthusiasm and aspiration in a truly conservative way, but also provide a safe service that the tourist has confidence in. So I believe genuinely that is the case. If it matters that there is strong recommendations that this is appropriate but light touch, I'm very happy to provide that with this dispatch box. Mr. Speaker, I've gone on for longer than I had intended to, but I genuinely believe, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I apologise, that today's bill will ensure that the pedicab industry is respectable, safe, and regulated in an appropriate fashion. And it brings the same accountability to this industry that we rightly expect on a great capital city, which is a tourist hotspot, and rightly so, and we wish to continue to support that. It is supported by Londoners, by the councillors, by the members of Parliament, and there is no question whatsoever that I'm happy to commend it to the House.
The question is that the bill be now ready second time. Simon Lightwood.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. And it's a pleasure to be opening the second reading this afternoon on behalf of the opposition. As my colleagues in the other place have set out, Labour welcomes this short yet vitally important bill, and we will support its progress, but it is long overdue. After years of asking for these powers from the government, this bill will finally give Transport for London the power to tackle the blight of unregulated pedicabs in London, largely in the city's West End. As colleagues will know all too well, pedicabs have been able to operate without regulation for decades due to a legal loophole in London. They're not considered taxis under the current law and are instead defined as stage carriages under the Section 4 of the Metropolitan Public Carriage Act of 1869. But with Section 4 no longer in force, it has allowed a completely unregulated pedicab industry to emerge in London. Indeed, it is the only, as the Minister inferred, the only form of unregulated public transport in the capital. Between 2018 and 2023, 24 pedicab operator incidents were reported in London, including 6 sexual offences and 13 injury-causing collisions. Pedicabs have also been notorious for egregious overcharging of tourists, as of course they are currently entirely free to determine their own fares, sometimes seemingly at random. As the Minister referenced, a tourist with 2 young children was charged over £450 for a 7-minute journey in a pedicab. The driver intimidated the tourist into immediate payment and then disappeared, presumably to avoid being reported. This is just one of many concerning reports of unacceptable behaviour from unlicensed operators. It's clear that TfL urgently need the powers necessary to regulate, and I'm pleased that this bill will clearly go a long way in making pedicabs safer for passengers, because it's this emphasis on safety which is vital. And though the Minister and I are in agreement that we do not want to see pedicabs banned from London streets, just for pedicabs to be as well regulated on safety as any other mode of public transport. Well, of course.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. He's speaking very eloquently about this, and I also welcome the Minister's words as well this afternoon. Does my honourable friend agree that there's a very similar situation with other new forms of transport, such as e-scooters and e-motorbikes, where hopefully there could be a similar discussion about the safety issues and balancing out the needs for new forms of transport with safety of pedestrians in a similar way? And would he perhaps say a few words about the need for the government to perhaps look at that issue as its next objective in this area of transport policy?
I agree with my honourable friend. I would have liked to have seen the government hold their promise on delivering a comprehensive transport bill. And things like e-scooters clearly need a decision one way or the other. We can't indefinitely extend trials. A regulated pedicab sector can bring enormous benefits for London as a unique zero-carbon way to travel in an equally unique, thriving part of London with a bustling nighttime economy. Indeed, a sustainable pedicab industry can be in keeping with the treasured, colourful, unique character of the West End, whilst also ensuring there are regulations in place to keep passengers safe. Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm pleased that the bill has reached this chamber in a much improved state, thanks to the hard work of colleagues in the other place, notably Labour Lords. Particularly, we welcome that the government has conceded on ensuring the power to regulate is entirely devolved to Transport for London, rather than the time-consuming, unnecessary step of requiring parliamentary approval. Such a requirement would have been anomalous compared to TfL's wider powers on private hire regulations, or indeed other combined authorities' regulatory powers. For that reason, we welcome the Government's removal of subsection 2 of Clause 6 and an insertion of Clause 7 on guidance from the Secretary of State instead. Additionally, we warmly welcome the Government's decision to amend Clause 2 to make provision for regulation on noise nuisance, which is a key concern that stakeholders have been raising for years. That being said, Mr Deputy Speaker, as positive as this bill is, the Government has taken far too long to get to this point. Transport for London, Westminster City Council, the Local Government Association and various nighttime economy trade associations have been calling for action on pedicabs for years. And for years, the Government repeatedly promised action, with private member bills even being proposed on the same topic by MPs on the Government's own benches. The reality is that this legislation is desperately overdue and should have been part of a much more comprehensive transport bill. Local councils, industry bodies and manufacturers alike are crying out for clarity from the Government on e-scooter and e-bike regulation, for instance, but the Government seem to refuse to take this opportunity to make progress in this area. Nonetheless, this bill is an important one in its own terms, and I'm pleased that TfL's power to regulate on this issue will be on the statute books in due course. A key issue that many stakeholders, including the Licensed Taxi Driver Association and Transport for London themselves, have raised is making pedicab operators eligible for enhanced disclosure and borrowing service checks, in line with what taxi and private hire drivers are currently subject to. I know this was raised by several colleagues in the other place, where the Lord Minister said the Government are looking into this. So I'd be grateful if the Minister could provide an update on this and whether this is something we could explore further in committee, as this really would be an opportunity to ensure passenger safety is as robust as possible. Overall, this is a much-needed but desperately overdue bill, and I look forward to working with the Minister and other colleagues as the bill progresses.
Thank you very much. I now call Nickie Aiken.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I, perhaps more than most here today, welcome the second reading of the Pedicabs London Bill. It does seem to be a groundhog day for me, as this will be the third time since entering Parliament in 2019 that I've stood in this chamber and spoken in a second reading highlighting the need for a licensing scheme for pedicabs in London. Madam Deputy Speaker, you and others in and outside Parliament could be forgiven for wondering why on earth the Government has given time for this small, tiny bill. One would expect that it should be made able to get through law via a private member's bill, as the Minister has already mentioned. And yes, it should have been. In fact, there were 4 attempts to introduce a pedicabs licensing scheme in London via private members' bills. First, as we heard from the Honourable Member for Sutton, and then by my predecessor Mark Field, and finally myself. Since entering Parliament, I've attempted to secure a PMB twice on pedicab licensing, but due to the way PMBs can fail due to a single objection to a bill, mine have failed. Therefore, I am truly grateful to the Government for, firstly, under the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who was 100% behind the wish to secure pedicab legislation. He agreed with the then Transport Secretary, the Right Honourable Member for Welwyn Hatfield, to put a clause in the planned transport bill, which fell when Mr Johnson resigned. I then started my lobbying from scratch and met with number 10 officials from the Sunak administration to make the case for pedicab legislation to be given government time. And I would like to put on record my thanks to help from people from across Parliament, particularly Baroness Stowell of Beeston, who has really supported my lobbying campaign with ministers and their special advisers. Madam Deputy Speaker, I would also like to put on record my thanks and my admiration for the 2 special advisers, James Nation and Will Tanner, who accepted that we needed to introduce pedicab regulation. And without them, I don't think we would be here today, and I would like to thank them and the Minister and the Secretary of State for Transport for really understanding the reasons why we need this legislation. I did not know for certain whether we would get government time, and therefore, when I stood in the other place and heard His Majesty announced a bill would be introduced to deal with the scourge of unlicensed pedicabs in London, you could have knocked me over with a feather. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is a fair question to ask why do we need this legislation at all? And I wish to first of all point out that this bill does not and will not propose to ban pedicabs from the streets of London. It is about improving the conditions for drivers and for passengers. In fact, I firmly believe that if we can have properly regulated pedicabs, they can offer a very positive and special visitor experience. It is important to note that, and as I said, it is my understanding that pedicab regulation already exists in this country, and where it has been tabled and exists in places like Oxford, York and Salisbury, we still see pedicabs, but they are a much better offer now. So I think it's very clear that regulating of pedicabs does not mean the eradication of pedicabs. But of course.
She will have seen, as I have, the briefing from the Cycling UK. And does she recall that that briefing says that even where local authorities have been keen to support local would-be pedicab operations, as has happened in Oxford, Salisbury and York, they have been unable to operate on a apply-for-hire basis because the local taxi operators who view them as competition start asking questions about whether the pedicabs and their operators have the same insurance, etc. So they haven't been able to operate in those areas outside London because of the opposition from the licensed taxi drivers.
I thank my honourable friend for that point. As far as I'm concerned, Cycling UK has supported this Pedicabs London bill, and I've had several meetings with them. I think he may have been involved in some of those meetings previously, and they've always understood why I want to bring in this bill. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it's very important to make the point that drivers and vehicles must be safe, and there have been too many instances when there have been police operations and operations in conjunction with Westminster City Council that we have found drivers who are unfit to be taking passengers, whether they are wanted for serious crimes, whether it's sexual violence crimes. I believe one person was actually found wanted for murder. There's, of course.
For giving way. Does she agree that part of this regulation is not just about ensuring that there's a fair and transparent fare model, but actually TfL will have the option to ensure that those drivers undergo criminal checks and that they have the right to work in the UK?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her intervention. That is the crux of why I want to do this, more than anything else, is to make these vehicles safe in the fact that they are passing MOTs and they are fit to be on the street, but also the drivers. And again, from the operations that the police and Westminster City Council has undertaken over years, we have found asylum seekers who haven't got the right to work driving these pedicabs. We have found illegal immigrants who haven't got the right to work here. And these people are also being exploited. Let's not forget that. One of the reasons why I think it's important to have regulated pedicabs is that it will ensure that drivers have rights. We also have to make sure that we have a regulated fare system in place, and operators must adhere to the highway code and not play blaring music at all hours of day and night. It is time, Madam Deputy Speaker, that pedicabs in London were regulated as black cabs are, as Ubers are, and as private hire vehicles are. I hear what the member for Christchurch said about the London Taxi Drivers Association, what they said 20 years ago. From my own meetings in the last couple of years, they have been very clear that they want a level playing field. They don't expect these pedicabs to be banned. They just want them to be as safe as pedicabs, as black cabs. Why should a black cab driver have to jump through so many hoops to be able to get on the road? And a pedicab driver can literally get on a pedicab, go onto the streets of Westminster and ply for trade. It cannot be right, and we have to make sure that the whole system is fair and just and legal. Madam Deputy Speaker, parts of my constituency, including Soho, Covent Garden, Marylebone and Fitzrovia, can become like the Wild West. It becomes the Wild West End at times because of the sheer numbers of pedicabs on the street. Too many play extraordinarily loud music, often block roads and pavements, disrupt residents and businesses, and have a poor track record for exploiting London tourists. I am extremely grateful for the wide range of support I've had for securing pedicab regulation from local people across the two cities and residents' associations such as the Soho Society, Marylebone Association and Covent Garden Residents Association, as well as businesses including the Hippodrome, Heart of London Business Association and the West End Company. I would also like to thank Roger Geffin from Cycling UK, Chris Dixon from Pedalme and Friedel Schroeder from the London Pedicabs Operators Association as well, who has been on this journey with me and have always provided me with the information and support for what I am intending to do. The reason why pedicabs are not regulated in London, as we've heard, can be traced back to the fact that under the Metropolitan Public Carriage Act 1869, pedicabs in Greater London are defined as a stage carriage, and modern legislation has not corrected the issues, and thus they do not fall under Transport for London's licensing powers. As a result, pedicabs are currently the only form of public transport that is not regulated in London. This bill corrects that. The bill clearly outlines that to attain a licence to operate a pedicab, operators must adhere to several requirements pertaining to their pedicabs. These requirements relate to the roadworthiness and cleanliness of pedicabs, safety and insurance requirements, the type of equipment that must be carried on board, the appearance and marking of pedicabs, and the conduct of pedicab operators. Madam Deputy Speaker, I must thank the noble members of the other place where this bill began its parliamentary journey, who have improved the bill and ensured it is as watertight as possible. I would like to put on record my grateful thanks to Transport Minister Lord Davis of Gower for his excellent stewardship of the bill through the other place, and for joining me on a visit to Leicester Square on a Sunday evening to see the situation for himself, as did the Honourable Member for Hexham, and I'm sure it was an enjoyable and different ministerial visit than they're both used to. But we did see at that time in Leicester Square 4 pedicabs blocking a pavement which would prevent emergency vehicles from being able to enter Leicester Square if there'd been an incident, whether it be an ambulance, a fire engine or police vehicles. These have got to be properly regulated to make sure that the public are safe. The other place has tightened up the definition of a pedicab to prevent any adjustments being made to a pedicab to get around licensing requirements. And this bill will ensure that not only is the conduct of operating a pedicab regulated, but that it provides Transport for London, who will operate the licensing scheme, with the powers to implement a proper fare system, which, like the ones we see for black cabs and Ubers. Rip-off fares from pedicabs are a constant theme in my inbox and in media coverage. Of course.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way and making such a powerful speech on why we need regulation on this. Is she aware of the BBC Democracy report where they did some undercover work in looking at the fee charges? One pedicab was charging a flat fee of £5 per minute. Another one reportedly charges close to £500 for a 10-minute ride. Does she not think that this is an extortionate rip-off?
I absolutely agree and thank the Honourable Lady for her points. And I think that was a very, very fascinating report by BBC Democracy and showed that some pedicab drivers, and must make the very, very important point that not all pedicab drivers are rogues, and there are brilliant organisations and companies like Pedalme, and I've worked with Chris Dixon, the founder. This is an outstanding pedicabs company. They properly look after their drivers, they look after their vehicles, and I want all pedicabs to be like that. And the BBC Democracy report did show that some pedicab drivers are being used for drug dealing and for taking people to brothels where goodness knows what's going to happen if they go to some very, very dodgy club. That is why we've got to regulate these and make sure that the drivers are fit to take passengers and to ensure that they are legally able to work in this country more than anything else. But rip-off fares from pedicabs are constantly in the media, especially as pedicab operators look to take advantage of vulnerable tourists enjoying the incredible culture offer of the West End. One constituent who came across one of these incidents with a tourist wrote to me saying the pedicab operator got very aggressive when the Americans refused to pay £300 for a journey from Trafalgar Square to Great Smith Street. That is a journey of 0.8 miles. Madam Deputy Speaker, I do welcome that this bill provides Transport for London with powers to set what fares can be charged, when and how passengers must be made aware of the fares, and what methods of payments are acceptable. Perhaps the most popular part of the bill for my constituents are the provisions on riders' conduct, which, thanks to the other place, has been strengthened to include noise limits. The frustration local people often face due to the loudspeakers many pedicabs carry was best summed up by a constituent who said to me, "I have no choice but to listen to music hour after hour, day after day, and often until the early hours of the morning. They are left in situ, able to do as they know, because they know that the council and the police have no powers to stop them. Therefore, I am pleased to see the other place strengthen the bill's ability to tackle unreasonable noise levels by adding noise restrictions to the conduct requirements operators must meet in order to keep their licences. Of course.
On the noise issues, you will know that St Thomas's Hospital, my constituency, where a number of these pedicabs congregate outside and you've got patients recovering from life-saving treatment, having that noise being blurted out in the early hours of the morning, does she agree with me that that's totally unreasonable?
It is completely unreasonable, and the Honourable Lady makes an absolute point. And it's hospitals, it's also hotels, and a losing business. If you have a hotel in the West End where you've got a pedicab outside, not moving for hours, at 2 o'clock in the morning, rightly, patrons can complain and ask their money back. So, you know, it's not just about residents and hospital patients, it's also about businesses losing money. I am therefore pleased that obviously that noise levels will be added to restrictions. And as my constituent rightly pointed out, pedicabs can get away with acting like this because there was no powers, or there are no powers, to contain them. But the Pedicabs London Bill will bring this, hopefully, to an end. For those operators who do not adhere to their licence terms, they will be given a fixed penalty notice. And if the conduct of operators does not improve after this, Transport of London will reserve the right to demobilise, seize and dispose of pedicabs that contravene the regulations. This will make a huge difference. Madam Deputy Speaker, I finally would like to touch on Transport for London's role here and would like to put on record my sincere thanks to Will Norman, the Mayor of London's Walking and Cycling Commissioner. He has worked closely with me on my private members' bills and has been a huge advocate for pedicab regulation. I note that the other place, in the other place, an amendment was laid to allow for the Department of Transport to provide Transport for London with statutory guidance on pedicab regulation in the future. I agree with the other place, and I welcome the fact the government has accepted this amendment and that the correct body to oversee this as they will be TfL, as they currently regulate licensing for all other taxi and private hires. Madam Deputy Speaker, it may have taken 4 PMBs, an abandoned transport bill, and years of lobbying and campaigning from politicians from across the political divide, but I'm confident that finally we will see the Pedicabs London Bill become law and the streets of London will be safer and we will have a safe and thriving pedicabs industry. Thank you.
Florence Eshalomi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's an honour to follow my neighbouring constituency member and to thank her for her support and work in bringing this bill to this stage. And I'd also like to pay tribute to the cross-party support that this bill has received. This bill is supported by the Mayor of London, my Borough Council, Lambeth Council, Westminster Council, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, and honourable members from across the political divide in this place. And like the honourable member for cities in Westminster, we share Westminster Bridge. Half of the bridge is in Vauxhall, the other half is in cities in Westminster. And I regularly cross the bridge on my way to work. And I think I don't need to tell any member in this House that that bridge can be busy. You literally have to fight to get your way across that bridge sometimes, right? And in some cases, literally fighting for your life. And it's good to see that, you know, and I want that bridge to be busy because it means that tourists are coming to London. It means that our nighttime economy is thriving. It means that my constituency of the South Bank are seeing those visitors come and spending. It means that people are supporting our local businesses. It means that people are able to thrive. And that's what we want. And that's what makes London unique. And it's really important that we celebrate that. But the fact that more and more people are coming to Westminster Bridge and parts of central London, it also means that people should have a good experience. I'll give way to London.
I'm most grateful. In that case, why is it on the Lambeth side of Westminster Bridge that there's still a proliferation of unlicensed market stalls selling hot dogs and blocking the pavement with impunity?
I thank the Honourable Member for raising that point, and this is an issue that I continuously raise with the South, with the Lambeth North Safer Neighbourhood Policing Team, with Lambeth Council, and rightly with the Met Police Commissioner. I've said to the Met Police Commissioner on a number of occasions that yes, there are many major policing challenges in London, but this is blighting a key part of London where we are having so many tourists, and also the crime element of those things. So working with the Safer Neighbourhood team led by Sergeant Watson, we have seen a number of prosecutions in recent months, and I hope that with the support and more funding for our police officers, we can make sure that we eradicate that for good. And coming back to the issue of pedicabs, it's an experience for many people visiting London. And the main purpose of this bill is not to ban pedicabs outright, but we cannot deny that their current unregulated regime is creating serious problems for tourists, residents, and, as my honourable friend for Cities and Westminster outlined, for the drivers themselves. This unregulated status is currently creating a risk to passengers and the road network. So we have a situation where currently someone getting into a pedicab has no clear idea of what they're getting into. They don't know how safe the driver of the pedicab is, how roadworthy the pedicab is, and how often it's been cleaned. And this is not just dangerous for everyone on board, but also it disadvantages those who spend their money maintaining their pedicab, only to see their hard work and trust and investment in their vehicles damaged by those who continue to take this risk. And it is right that subsection 2A, 26A, B and C give Transport for London a power to create a clear safety and cleanliness standards so that people can actually trust that the pedicab they're using is not dangerous. I also welcome the amendment to subsection 26261 made in the other place. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll confess that sometimes when I am driving, I like listening to music. I won't tell you my choice of music, but it ranges from Beyonce to Spice Girls to Taylor Swift and to Usher Raymond. But we know that music can also be the experience, and it goes a long way in the pedicabs. But as the Honourable Member for Cities in Westminster outlined, I've had constituents complain about the loud noise and music from pedicabs, and the noise that they make, the noise nuisance in residential areas. So I think it is right that we give TfL the power to act on that. So while a lot of our focus may be on the problems customers face in pedicab, rightly so, we should also look at the working conditions of those drivers. Many drivers find themselves being exploited. They work long hours and tiring shifts in close proximity to extremely loud music. And some of them also, let's be honest, some of them face abuse from customers with very little protection. So it is right that this bill allows the provision to be made relating to the working conditions of drivers under subsection 26H, and I hope that this is something that isn't forgotten when TfL are drafting these regulations. And like many people, I also welcome subsection 25 of this bill, which relates to how the fares are advertised, charged and paid for. I think we've heard many stories and anecdotes of how those fares are not fair. I think any of us would expect that pedicabs will or should become a cost-effective way of travelling around our capital. And it's clear that many people getting into a pedicab do so because of that wild and wacky experience. Those lights can be quite attractive sometimes, especially when you've got the pink fluffy, the feathers in them as well. But we have to be honest in that there's a big difference between paying a premium for an experience and frankly getting exploited. The Minister touched on in July the BBC report of the Belgian tourist who was charged £464 for a mile-long ride, and when she complained, the driver demanded immediate payment, making her feel really threatened. And do we think that any tourist experiencing this will want to come back? Do we think that they're going to tell their friends and families, yes, come to London, this is what will happen? And it's just not just about this one egregious case, but there are many other cases, as we've seen, which creates that exploitation. Many tourists have been advertised trips between the likes of Westminster Bridge just here to Trafalgar Square without knowing how close they are. And rightly so, they feel cheated when they're charged £50 for a 10-minute journey. Now, I know London is expensive, but come on, that is just a rip-off. And it's right that we also recognise that Pedicab may charge that little bit extra for those pink flashing lights and the music, but we must draw the right balance between a premium and being ripped off. Madam Deputy Speaker, London should be one of the best cities in the world to be a tourist, but our current lax regulation around pedicabs not only destroys the image, but also rightfully a robust standards in other sectors and experience of the UK as a whole. At present, TfL is currently unable to act to help to ensure the safety of pedicabs, of passengers, and a fair and transparent operation. In a city of almost 8 million people, pedicabs are the only form of unregulated public transport in the capital. This bill being proposed will allow TfL to set standards for operators and ensure drivers undergo those robust criminal checks. As my honourable friend for Cities and Westminster has highlighted, this bill is long overdue. It is necessary to allow pedicabs to be a positive part of the London transport capital network.
Sir Christopher Chope.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's a pleasure to be able to participate in this debate, and I'm grateful to the Minister for having indicated in his remarks that he is open to discussion and persuasion on what I hope will be some useful amendments which can be brought forward to improve this bill when it gets to the committee and report stage, which I see is in a committee of the whole House rather than upstairs. It's just as well it's in a committee of the whole House, because if it was going to be dealt with in a committee upstairs, I'm sure that I would never be selected by the Committee of Selection, which is controlled by the government, to participate on that committee. But can I say in opening that I think it's an allegory for this Parliament, really, that at a time when we've got thousands of illegal immigrants on our streets who have jumped bail or got rid of their tags, that we've got rogue parking operators the government has been trying to deal with for years and years. We've got e-bikes running amok and causing mammoth problems for pedestrians in London. And we've got all sorts of other obstruction of the highway by protesters, making it very difficult for people visiting London at the weekend particularly to be able to go about their lawful business. It's an allegory that this Parliament has chosen prime time on a Wednesday to discuss the burning issue of pedicabs. I can't hear what my honourable friend is saying from a sedentary position, but of course I will.
My honourable friend is making an interesting speech, but would he agree that we could have done this and should have done this back in 2018 when the honourable lady was then the leader of Westminster Council, and I was moving the private members' bill here? We could have got this done on a Friday afternoon.
Well, we could have got it done much sooner than that. We could have got it done in around 2005-06 when London Transport brought forward a private bill, including provision to deal with this. But in that bill and in subsequent bills, we've always encountered the difficulty that London Transport was unwilling, I don't think it was unable, it was unwilling to produce any draft regulations. So we were being asked to approve potential legislation which was blind as to what was going to be contained within it. And it's interesting, isn't it, that all these years have gone by, and one might have expected that by now, the Transport for London would have a document which would have detailed draft regulations in respect of pedicabs. They haven't got anywhere near it. And indeed, when I was privileged to be invited to a meeting that my honourable friend for the cities of Westminster and London organised, it was clear at that meeting that Transport for London were unable to produce any draft and were unable to say how long it would be before they would produce a draft, and unwilling to produce a draft in order to inform debate on the private members' bill that my honourable friend was promoting. So is it surprising, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there's a lot of suspicion around this issue? Because people think that the ulterior motive of Transport for London is to regulate pedicabs out of existence. Obviously, you could say that this is not the intention and all the rest of it. But actually, if the consequence of this legislation is that pedicab will be extinct in a few years' time, then we as legislators should be saying, well, do we really want that situation to arise? And I certainly don't want that situation to arise, and I'm concerned that there has been a lot of misrepresentation around the extent of the support that there is for this bill. In principle, the support for the bill, because all the regular pedicab operators, they would love to have a light regulatory regime to get rid of the rogues who are on the streets. So obviously I'll give way to the Honourable Lady. Of course I will.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way on that. Just coming back to the history of this bill and the proposals from many different politicians from cross-parties, organisations and business improvement districts right across London, the 32 boroughs in London, London councils. Does he believe that as representatives of London, they, in speaking to their residents and business, would see why we'd need this bill?
I see that, absolutely. And I've already referred to the London Assembly Transport Committee scrutiny into the future of London's pedicabs, which was published in February 2005. And in that bill, the Transport Committee of the City of London make it quite they make it quite clear that they are in favour of a very light regulation of pedicabs, and not the heavy-handed regulation which seems to be envisaged at the moment, and is certainly what is feared by organisations such as Cycling UK. I could read it again to the Honourable Lady.
Remember for giving way. He keeps quoting his 2004 report. Does he appreciate that 20 years on, the transport system in London has moved on? The transport system in London is more diverse. The transport system in London is more accessible. And regulating these pedicabs will help improve the transport network for residents, businesses and tourists alike coming to London. Does he agree with me on that?
Well, I think the jury's out. And the reason I say that is because Transport for London has got discretion to, for example, decide whether or not to introduce 20-mile-an-hour zones. And we know there's also got discretion as to whether to outlaw vehicles of a particular type, whether they are diesel vehicles, and to introduce ultra-low emission zones. They've got that discretion. But many people living in London, particularly in outer London, where they are dependent upon their cars or vans for going around their normal business, they think that Transport for London has abused its powers, and indeed they've asked the government to intervene. And that was the message that came out of the Uxbridge by-election, the Honourable Lady may remember. So is Transport for London to be trusted? The short answer is that they haven't behaved responsibly in relation to the extension of ULEZ charges across the whole of the conurbation. How do we know they're to be trusted on this if we're going to give them a blank cheque on which to write? I'll give way once more to the Honourable Lady.
I remember for giving way for that. As a lifelong Londoner, does he agree with me that some of the measures that he's just outlined, 20 mile per hour, ULEZ, congestion charge, are all benefits to help improve transport in London, to improve the air quality? We have a major issue with air quality when we step out from this building onto Westminster Bridge in my constituency, where the air quality is quite bad. We have a major issue where we're trying to get more people to be active to use public transport, and that will only happen if measures like the ones he's outlined are introduced with support of Londoners and the councils and residents in London. Does he agree with me on that?
I'm afraid I don't agree with everything that the Honourable Lady is saying, but I do agree with the desirability of having emissions-free forms of transport in London, and one such emissions-free form of transport is a pedicab. And so I don't understand why the Honourable Lady seems to be relying upon Transport for London legislating with a heavy hand in order to exclude that sort of activity. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I appreciate giving way and forgive me for having to leave the chamber for a few minutes, but would you agree with me that actually what this law tries to do is tries to bring, not only make sure that the pedicabs are only become regulated like every other form of public transport, but pedicabs are treated in London like they are in every other part of the country. They're staged carriages in London. Everywhere else they're hansom cabs, which means they can be regulated everywhere apart from London. There is the regulated Pedicabs Coalition, which brings together the London Taxi Drivers Association that he mentioned earlier on in an intervention, as well as casinos, hospitalities, businesses and residents groups in Westminster that really want this to happen, so that we have pedicabs on the street, but regulated ones.
Well, I hope that my honourable friend's going to make his own speech in due course, because I know he believes passionately about this issue. But can I just refer him and other members of the House to the briefing from the Cycling UK, and my honourable friend referred in her opening remarks to Roger Geffin, the Policy Director for Cycling UK, and this is indeed a document that's been produced by him. And there's a paragraph in his briefing which starts, "Beyond the bill, the need for a national regulatory framework for pedicabs. As things currently stand," he says, "pedicabs can operate in London under legislation dating from 1869, which is the point that's already being made about stage carriages. Conversely," he goes on to say, "in the rest of Britain, i.e. outside London, pedicabs have to operate under the same legal framework as taxis. This makes it almost impossible in practice for pedicabs to operate on a ply-for-hire basis outside London, because the insurance and other requirements for taxis are so onerous and are entirely disproportionate for addressing the potential risks." And then he goes on to say, even where local authorities have been keen to support local would-be pedicab operators, those pedicab operators haven't been able to start up because of the weight of the regulation. That was the point which I made earlier in an intervention with the Minister. And so then it says, that this, Roger Giffin says, it's potentially valuable that the Secretary of State's now going to be able to issue guidance to TfL, but it would be great if that guidance could in future be extended to other non-London licensing authorities at such a time as a new regulatory framework is put in place for licensing taxis and minicabs, because he is concerned, as a cyclist, that this great method of transport, namely a rickshaw, a pedal-driven rickshaw, is not being used in places outside London for the purpose of enabling people to apply for hire and travel from one place to another. So this is the concern. And that's why, if I may say so, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think that some of the assertions that the aim of this bill is not to regulate pedicabs out of existence, but is merely to enable the bringing into existence of a regulatory regime that outlaws the most extreme examples of bad behaviour. I think that those expressions are naive. And that's why I think it's incumbent upon Transport for London to be able to produce a draft regulation for this. And they've been at this for 20 plus years, as we've heard. And even as we speak now, Madam Deputy Speaker, Transport for London cannot produce drafts of the regulations which they have it in mind to introduce. I put out this challenge, and that is that I don't know when the business managers will decide that we're going to be able to have the committee stage and report stage of this bill. But I put out a challenge to Transport for London. I hope that this message will be carried to them by my honourable friend the Minister, that they should bring forward, before we get to the committee stage and the report stage, a draft of the regulations which they have got in mind. Because if they bring those forward, then we'll be able to see whether our fears and suspicions, which are shared by Cycling UK, are well-founded or wide of the mark. That is a perfectly reasonable way in which to proceed. It's been commonplace in this House to get draft regulations seen before we finalise the legislation. But there doesn't seem to be any appetite at the moment on the part of London Transport for London to do this, and we haven't even had an indication of the timescale within which they wish to introduce these regulations. How much longer are the good pedicab operators in London going to have to wait before the regulation, the lightweight regulation for which they've been campaigning for so many years, is actually introduced? So, Madam Deputy Speaker, that is my one of my suggestions, and that is that the government should recognise that in the rest of this the country, where a different regulatory regime relates to pedicabs, pedicabs do not exist because they are regulated out of existence. And if the government wishes to promote emission-free forms of transport, such as pedicabs, why doesn't it get on and introduce a system for guidance to transport authorities and local authorities outside the London area, so that they can take the burden of regulation off potential entrepreneurs who wish to be able to provide pedicab services in cities, as we've heard, such as Oxford, Salisbury and York. And if that was to come out of this bill, a commitment by the government that that's what they were going to do, then it would be a really worthwhile exercise. Can I also say that I don't think that the government is right to be sitting on the fence in relation to e-bikes and e-scooters. And why is it that we are concentrating on this small number of pedicabs rather than the very much larger number of e-bikes and e-scooters which are causing mayhem for many residents living in London, not to mention elsewhere in the country? So that's... Can I now... Of course I will.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. Just to say that in terms of e-scooters, as I'm sure the honourable gentleman knows, other than in certain pilot sites, the use of e-scooters on the highway is illegal. And therefore it's not really a matter of regulation, rather a matter of enforcement. And many of us would love to see much more enforcement of them. And similarly on e-bikes, of which I used to be a regular user and owner, he will know that there are significant regulations on e-bikes, not least that they are speed limited to 15 miles an hour. However, quite a lot of manufacturers have hidden in the bike somewhere the ability to override that speed limit. Similarly, that is a subject for enforcement rather than for regulation. So while I understand and I appreciate and I agree with him on this matter, I don't think it's a matter for legislation. It's more a matter, frankly, in London and elsewhere for the police.
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right. And so often in this place we find ourselves introducing new legislation because the existing legislation which is already in place isn't being enforced. And isn't it surprising, my honourable friend for the cities of London and Westminster didn't mention this in her remarks, but isn't it extraordinary that it took the City of Westminster so long before they started using powers that they've already got to control, as they put it, pedicab chaos and start prosecuting rogue pedicab operators. The City of Westminster issued a press release on the 20th of December priding themselves on having been successful in prosecutions in the Westminster Magistrates Court against We'll just make this point against 6 pedicab operators, which resulted in fines nearing £3,000. That shows that there are already laws in place which are not being adequately enforced, which is the point which my right honourable friend makes. I give way.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, and I actually agree with him on the safety of e-bikes. Tragically, a young girl, she didn't lie, thankfully, a young 3-year-old was hit by an e-bike on the 19th of July in Mitesfield Park in my constituency, and she was left with life-changing injuries. So I think there is a real issue in terms of the safety of e-bikes. But does he also agree that with pedicabs, and many of them obstruct cycle lanes, they cause an obstruction, they cause danger, and this is why we need clear regulation to ensure that they follow the highway code and code of practice on that?
Well, I'm very much in favour of regulation where it is necessary. But to take her own council, Lambeth, if I'm right, Madam Deputy Speaker, I recall reading in a national newspaper within the last few days that Lambeth Council, because it has not even been complying with its own the regulations relating to putting up street signs and prohibiting entry into low traffic neighbourhoods, that it has been able to fleece the motoring public of many millions of pounds. The Honourable Lady is laughing at that, but that's not the view of the motorists who've suffered and paid those very high penalties. And it's not even as though the money that Lambeth has recovered through that foul means has actually been reinvested in improving the road network. As somebody who has the privilege, if I call it that, of living in Lambeth, I can see with my own eyes exactly the poor state of the pavements and the highways in Lambeth, and the neglect of... I'll give way once more.
The honourable member for giving way on that. What he was referring to, and the minister may know, is a trial low traffic neighbourhood in my honourable member for Stretham's part of the constituency off Streatham High Road, and that is still in a trial period. So the council is consulting with that. But does he agree with me that the cuts that my local authority have faced over the last 14 years is why they're having to scale back on some of the things that they want to do? And does he agree that, you know, it would be helpful if we as cross-party MPs lobby the Chancellor to fund local government adequately?
Well, Madam Deputy, I'm not going to get drawn into the Lambeth-Wandsworth comparison and the time when I was leader of Wandsworth Council and we helped secure the lowest council taxes in London, and Lambeth at that stage had around the highest levels of council tax. I think that the Honourable Lady would be well advised to keep away from issues around the efficiency or otherwise of Lambeth Council. But let me revert to the subject matter for this afternoon's debate. And looking at the text of the definition of pedicab in clause 1(2), this is again is an issue that Roger Geffin has drawn attention to in his briefing. Currently, the reading of the bill is pedicab means a pedal cycle or a pedal cycle in combination with a trailer that is constructed or adapted for carrying one or more passengers and is made available with a driver for hire or reward. The point being made by Cycling UK is that the pedal cycle may be in that situation of being made available, but it actually may be being used for the delivery of goods. So why should it be controlled by the provisions in this bill? And it may also be being used by somebody who has not been plying for hire, but is taking a passenger in the pedicab as a result of a private hire agreement entered into, not from a public highway, but as a private agreement. For example, hotels and hospitality centres in London may wish to use the services of pedicabs for their customers as a privilege for those customers, so that, for example, they can visit the West End and don't have to struggle on public transport, and at the same time can enjoy the fun of being able to travel by a pedicab. Why should pedicabs in that situation be outlawed by this legislation under the definition that's contained within the bill? And so that is a concern, and I also couple with that the concern expressed that the applying for hire of pedicabs is also too broadly drafted because it doesn't exclude a private hire it excludes private hire, but it would not exclude private hire relating, on a definition in the bill, relating to pedicabs exclusively. So, and that's the detail relating to clause 5 of the bill. And I hope that my honourable friend on the front bench has looked at the briefing from Cycling UK, because it's a very balanced, well-argued briefing. And it reinforces the point which was being made at the beginning of this debate. Cycling UK and the London Pedicab Operators Association has been calling for such a framework, a regulatory framework, for over 20 years. Had it been put in place, the Wild West situation which now exists in London could have been averted. However, it needs to be made clear that the regulatory framework's objectives are to support a safe and responsible pedicab sector and not potentially to kill it off. And he goes on to say, the bill as drafted contains no safeguards to assure us on this point. So if my honourable friend can provide those safeguards that are going to be contained in the bill, which are not in the bill at the moment, I'd be happy to give way. No. Well, I thought she wanted to intervene, but she obviously doesn't want to intervene to draw attention to those safeguards which Cycling UK, which she prayed in aid as a supporter earlier on. Cycling UK say those safeguards are missing from the current bill. My honourable friend seems to be asserting that they are in the current bill, and I would like to see if that's the situation, whereabouts they are in the current. It's not. I wouldn't have thought it was an unreasonable request to make. I'll give way to the Minister.
I hesitate to intervene, but the position that used to exist is that the government was going to do the secondary regulation, and it was decided in the other place that that would be quicker and better to be done through Transport for London. So to criticise Transport for London when this has only been produced in the last few weeks in the other place is a little harsh, given that that was not intended when the bill was originally published. It is clearly the case, though, that we continue to support this industry, and we can argue the toss in relation to the briefing that he's referred to, but I can assure him that it is not our intention, as he has put it, to regulate this particular industry out of existence.
Obviously, I accept what my right honourable friend says, but if it is not that the intention, but it happens that in practice it is regulated out of existence, what is the government going to do about it? Perhaps my honourable friend would answer that question. Because at the moment there's nothing in the bill which is actually going to enable the situation to be rectified. If Transport for London behave in the irresponsible way in which they have in relation to ULEZ, and they do the similar with and appease the Licensed Taxi Drivers Association and effectively outlaw pedicabs in London, what is going to be done about it? And I hear no response. That is why we need to have proper safeguards written into this legislation. As far as the point made by the Minister that Transport for London have only just known about the responsibilities for this, they themselves proposed their own legislation on this in 2005. So imagine when they produced that legislation that they had in mind exactly what they wanted to do. When my two honourable friends, they produced their private members' bills on this subject, it was clear then that the regulations would be brought forward by Transport for London. We asked Transport for London what was going to be contained in those regulations, and they basically said, we haven't got the time or inclination to start drafting those regulations now. And even as we speak, we don't know what the timescale is for the production of those regulations and the introduction of this regime. The Minister's also, I'm not sure that he actually said that he had read the 4 pages of Roger Geffin's briefing on this, but if he hasn't, I will happily share it with him afterwards. In that briefing, concern is expressed, and I certainly share this concern, that at the moment the bill says that the Transport for London must consult whoever it considers appropriate. Well, what's the point of having that? Why don't we say something specific, like Transport for London must consult organisations representing pedicab operators, cyclists and pedestrians, and others, but including those. At the moment, there is no obligation in this bill for Transport for London to consult pedicab operators, cyclists or anybody else, people involved in the hospitality industry and so on. Of course I will.
Thank you. I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. My understanding, and the Honourable Member for Lambeth may be able to correct me, having had the role as Transport Committee Chair at City Hall, but my understanding was that TfL has to undertake a statutory consultation on any regulation that may be introduced if this bill is passed before it can actually succeed and become a proper licensing scheme. So a consultation with all the relevant parties and with businesses and with residents will take place before a licensing regime is introduced.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for saying that, because in that case I'm sure she will support, perhaps draft it herself, an amendment to make clear on the face of the bill exactly what she has said. At the moment, the discretion as to whom should be consulted rests solely with Transport for London, which I think is ridiculous, frankly. So, can I also expand a bit upon the point I was making about Clause 5 of the bill and the need for clarification of what is meant by a power-assisted pedicab? The Cycling UK believe that potential pitfalls could be avoided by referencing the Electrically Assisted Pedal Cycle Regulations 1985 to define what vehicles will be exempt from the legislative requirements for private hire vehicles. And I hope that the Minister will take that point on board. There have been a number of other suggestions and amendments put forward by Cycling UK, and amongst others to say, well, what's going to happen about pedicab stands? Subclause 2.7 of the Clause 2.7 of the bill currently provides for TfL to make regulations to limit the places, times and or circumstances in which pedicabs may apply for hire or operate.
Order. Just to remind the Right Honourable Gentleman that in the second reading speeches, we don't go into huge detail about the different clauses, because that is obviously for the committee stage. I'm sure the Honourable Gentleman will bring him back to the wider issues. Thank you. Sir Christopher Chope.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I take your point completely. But of course, in this situation, this is not a situation where this bill's going to go into committee upstairs, and that committee stage would start with evidence coming, a couple of evidence sessions from people who are interested in the bill and members on the committee looking at that. This is a situation where the government has got on the order paper a motion that this should be dealt with in 3 hours. All the remaining stages should be dealt with in 3 hours. There's no indication as to how much time there's going to be between now and the time that is timetabled for this House. And therefore, I thought it would be very helpful if I flagged up in advance some of the concerns which I have got about this bill, and which I'm referring to in this second reading speech, which as the deputy leader, the deputy chairman of the House knows, is that it's for a second reading speech can extend to things that are not included in the bill, and that's why I'm referring to things that could be amended in the bill and be included in the bill, which are not currently included in the bill. That's my intent, Madam Deputy Speaker.
extremely helpful because I think the right honourable gentleman, who is very experienced and is obviously on the chairman's panel and understands a lot about the procedure, that basically we still, whilst he's flagging up issues, too much detail would be inappropriate in terms of the complete details of the clauses. But I'm sure he's coming back to his main points, and I'd just remind him that I have got 2 other speakers as well to get in. Sir Christopher Chope.
Deputy Speaker, fortunately, because there's no other government business, or hasn't been much government business today, we've got a reasonable period of time for discussing this. But to summarise the point which I was seeking to make, that is that Cycling UK say there are all powers being taken in the bill to for TfL to make regulations to limit this, that and the other, but there's no power to require them to actually provide places where pedicabs can have stands. And so that again seems to be rather asymmetrical or illiberal, I may say. So and there's a final point which I want to make, and that is the concern that they are expressing about the need for consistency between civil offences relating to the use of pedicabs and motor vehicles. And they refer specifically to subsection 3(5)(a). I won't refer to that in detail, taking the advice that you've given, Madam Deputy Speaker. But there's, if I may say so, I think there's sufficient meat in this bill for us to have a very lively discussion at committee and report stage. But I hope that in advance of that, we'll get a clearer view from the government and particularly the Minister about whether or not it is the government's intent essentially to stand by idly while giving powers to Transport for London, which hasn't exactly got a good record on all this, exercising what the government would hope would be its good intent to facilitate a high quality of pedicab regime within London, when we know jolly well that quite a lot of the people who are concerned about pedicabs in London do not wish to stop short of actually banning them altogether or introducing regulation which would have exactly the same effect.
Sarah Olney.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wholeheartedly welcome this legislation and the steps taken by the government to introduce a licensing regime for the only form of transport in London which is still unregulated. I hope to see the development of the pedicabs industry across London, providing employment and entrepreneurial opportunities, as well as a safe, affordable and carbon-free form of transport, especially for those who are unable to utilise other forms of active travel. In order to ensure that regulation can promote the use of pedicabs rather than merely suppress the negative aspects of the unregulated trade, it's important to ensure sufficient care and attention is paid to how such a trade might operate. The Liberal Democrats urge the Government and TfL to ensure that adequate consultation is done with relevant councils and user groups, such as the ones in my constituency of Richmond Park, to ensure the new regime is effective and that regulation is implemented as smoothly as possible. My particular interest in pedicabs arises from their use as a means of transport in parts of the capital that are currently closed to motor traffic. I refer, of course, to Hammersmith Bridge in my constituency in particular. We are shortly to mark the 5th anniversary of its closure to motor traffic, although I can assure the Minister this milestone will not be celebrated with any particular joy amongst the communities of Barnes, Isheen or Mortlake, or indeed wider afield, who have suffered ever since with the consequences of appalling traffic congestion. There has yet to be a complete analysis of the full economic consequences to the capital of the continued closure of the bridge, but even if there were, it could not encompass all of the missed opportunities that my constituents have suffered, the passing trade missed by small businesses in Barnes, the employment opportunities that couldn't be taken up, and the educational, social and cultural events that had to be missed because people were unable to cross the river. During the 2019 election campaign, various Conservative politicians filmed themselves at the bridge, promising to get it fixed. Yet here we are, staring down the barrel of another general election, and no progress has been made. The government has remained shamefully silent on their plans to fix the bridge, despite having been in possession of a business case from Hammersmith and Fulham Council for the past year. However, adversity breeds innovation, and my enterprising constituents in Barnes have not sat by passively while being let down by the government. In 2021, a temporary pedicab service was put in place across Hammersmith Bridge by the Barnes Community Association. In the 6 months that it was operational, this scheme carried more than 9,000 people over the Thames and was a lifeline for those members of my constituency who can't access the shops, the hospitals and other services in Hammersmith while the bridge has been closed. This temporary scheme demonstrated that there is demand for transport across Hammersmith Bridge beyond cycling and walking, especially amongst older people and those who have limited mobility. The ability to cross the bridge connects people with economic and social opportunities denied to them by reliance on a lengthy and increasingly unreliable bus route. Should this legislation pass, I urge ministers to work with TfL to create a new pedicab service across the bridge that could serve as a model for other schemes in London. I have met with transport ministers, officials from the Mayor's office, local councillors, all of whom expressed support for this idea. And I hope that the Minister will now publicly commit to working with TfL to renew efforts to get a pedicab service up and running across Hammersmith Bridge should this legislation be enacted. And I believe that if a pedicab service could be put in place initially to serve those who wish to cross Hammersmith Bridge, it could work as a proof of concept to enable the service to be extended to other parts of London where the promotion of active travel has been hindered by the need to cater for those with reduced mobility. I'd like to acknowledge the contribution of Liberal Democrat colleagues in the other place where this legislation originated. Particularly, I welcome the fact that this bill will provide the framework not only to address the noise pollution often caused by pedicabs in London, but also help to address the safety issues for both passengers and pedestrians that are often linked to the driving of these vehicles. Further, I'm pleased we'll be able to crack down on the extortionate fares often charged by pedicabs, with reports of some journeys of only 10 minutes resulting in fares of hundreds of pounds for the passenger. This legislation will therefore be useful not just in enabling a setting up of new pedicab schemes, but in regulating those already in existence. I'd like to take the opportunity to pay tribute to the outstanding work of Liberal Democrat London Assembly member Caroline Pidgeon, who has campaigned for years on the issue of pedicabs in our capital, as well as being an effective voice for Londoners on so many issues relating to crime and transport. She has given great service to the people of London in her 16 years as an Assembly member and will be much missed when she stands down in May. This legislation is a welcome step to set up a framework to regulate pedicab usage in London, and the Liberal Democrats will be supporting this bill today. My constituents in Richmond Park will particularly welcome the opportunity to make use of a clean, safe and good value transport option to access the north side of the Thames, and I hope that the government will continue to approach this legislation in an enabling rather than suppressing spirit. And my constituents are still demanding answers on the long-term future of the bridge, and I will continue to press for these, but a short-term solution to the problem of access will nonetheless be welcome. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Kit Malthouse.
Madam Deputy Speaker, some years ago, as I emerged from one of the watering holes in Soho that I used to frequent before the children came along, I happened upon a scene where an inebriated individual was standing in front of a pedicab, swaying backwards and forwards. And as I passed, I heard him say to the pedicab driver, "How much to Guildford, mate?" At which point there was an exchange that I didn't overhear. The man got into the pedicab and off it went. Now, I have no idea what happened to that poor chap, whether he made it to Guildford or not in a pedicab. I doubt it very much from the fringes of Leicester Square. But what occurred to me after the event, that what was probably going to happen was what we've heard from other members have happened to various people with pedicabs. There was effectively going to be a sort of mugging take place. That this chap in his, as I say, relaxed state was likely to be relieved of quite a lot of money for a service that he, in his confused manner, had stumbled into, probably with a sense of good humour or adventure or desperation from getting home. And it struck me then that we really needed to do something about the pedicab system in central London. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't want to detain the House too long, and I feel a little bit, I have to say, like an SNP member commenting on legislation that only affects England, and that in my constituency, like my honourable friend, there are no pedicabs, although I look forward to the amendment at report stage from my honourable friend that would allow a relaxation of licensing in Bournemouth and Christchurch for pedicabs to emerge for his constituency. That's a campaign that I'm sure will feature on his election leaflets come the big day later this year. But nevertheless, notwithstanding my imposition on the debate, having my antecedents in London as a Westminster councillor and also as a deputy mayor for 8 years at Central London, I did want to comment on the basis that I support this legislation. I do so for 4 reasons. First of all, I regard myself as an economic liberal. I do think we should avoid as much regulations as we possibly can to allow the private sector to flourish and, frankly, for grown adults to enter into contracts between themselves freely. However, more important than that, to me, is that in any industry, economy or area, that there should be a level playing field. And we do have to accept that these vehicles operate in London by dint of a strange loophole left in rather ancient legislation. And in the same way that when Airbnb arrived in London in a big way, all the hotels, who were regulated very heavily and who have significant costs in terms of insurance and maintenance, were quite right in complaining that here was an unregulated competitor entering the market and that the government had to take a decision. You either regulate them the same as us or you regulate none of us. And allow us all to compete fairly, that notion of a level playing field is key, I think. And while I was at City Hall, I supported the introduction or the arrival in London of Uber and other now related taxi services. I did so on the basis that there should be a level playing field with the black cab service, and if there wasn't a level playing field, then black cab should have some privileges that Uber and others wouldn't have. And that the job of the government or the regulatory authority was to balance those rights and privileges and regulation to make sure that all competition was fair. And at the moment, as a number of members have said, it isn't fair that this particular form of transport should not be regulated in the way other cabs are. The second reason is that while many of us love and cherish the slight chaos of the centre of our capital city, it does from time to time require order, and in particular it requires order on the streets. Anybody who drives in London on a regular basis will know that it is hazardous at the best of times, not least because the growth in cycling and the fact that we now will have to drive at 20 miles an hour means that there is a lot of overtaking, chaotic behaviour. Motorists have to keep their eyes out and eyes peeled at all times for people swerving across the road at sudden moments and very often taking their life in their hands. And so we need a sense of order. And particularly, as I say, in the densely built centre of town, it strikes me that, in my experience, these pedicabs do not contribute to that sense of order. And having been in close shaves with a couple of them over the years, I can say that very often they are dangerously driven, badly parked, they block the roads and pavements, they cause, as my honourable friend for Westminster says, cause problems for emergency vehicles who need access, particularly to pedestrianised areas. And so we do need a sense of order, and this will achieve that. The third thing to say is that city centres that are successful, and London is a particularly successful one, don't happen by accident. They happen because they are curated. And when I was a Westminster councillor and again at City Hall, we were very careful to preserve the ability of residents to live in central London, that the West End in particular should be a mixed residential and commercial area, and that was key to its success. And if you have a sense of nuisance, which many of these are, you will have heard the music and the lights and the rest of it, it's just another straw on the camel's back to drive the resident out of central London. Now, if you want the West End to stay vibrant, successful, the powerhouse, frankly, of the economy that it is, we cannot allow it to turn into the city, where there are no residents, it's dead after 9 o'clock and there's no one there at the weekends. Right? This is just not the way to curate a city centre. Now, curating a city centre is an art as much as it is a science, and the municipal authorities have an obligation to allow a certain amount of chaos and scruff I've lamented the municipal domestos, for example, that has been poured over Spitalfields by the city corporation. They've destroyed that asset for the city, and it's now just another dull shopping centre filled with chains. And I look to companies like Soho Estates, for example, who I think are great custodians of the area around Soho Square, where they do carefully curate who occupies their properties so that it maintains, I don't know, both the reputation and the character of Soho as a slightly, slightly louche part of the capital, shall we say, which all of us have enjoyed from time to time, mostly in our youth. But that curation also requires there to be the tools with which we can control some of these activities, and that includes, in my mind, pedicabs. And then the fourth reason that I support the legislation is the issue of crime. There is, I'm afraid, unfortunately, a litany of stories of crimes being committed by people who are using these cabs, whether it's them ripping off tourists, whether it's them putting passengers in danger, whether it's the pedicabs being used to run drugs, all the rest of it. As I say, they are not unrelated to the criminal fraternity, and we need to be able to root those people out and have control to remove them. Because it's all just about making money, right? And if you remove them and leave space for the reputable operators to operate, then I think we'll have a much better sense of safety, shall we say, for the public in central London. So while I acknowledge my honourable friend's hesitancy about regulation, and in normal circumstances I would share it, I do think that the notion of a level playing field and having a service that operates within the capital that is reputable around the world and does not feature, frankly, on social media for tourists in other countries as one of the rip-offs you must avoid in the capital, a bit like so many Italian cities now are advertised on social media as being infested with pickpockets. We have to think about the reputation of our city internationally and indeed its impact nationally. And that's why, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very keen to support this legislation and have been a long-standing supporter of this step since my time at City Hall. Thank you.
Shadow Minister Bill Esterson.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. This has been an interesting debate. Some contributions interesting in a good way, some perhaps less so. But we have had very much agreement, broadly speaking, with one exception, that this is a thoroughly good thing. And I'm very pleased to see the powers finally being granted to Transport for London to tackle the challenges and the difficulties of unregulated pedicabs, which you've heard described by a number of members from across London in particular. The Honourable Lady, and I pay tribute to her work on this over many years from cities of London and Westminster, and grateful to her for quoting the views of the London Pedicabs Association, I think I heard correctly, and their call for regulation, that actually the industry itself is very keen to see action on behalf of those operators who want to do the right thing. I also congratulate the Honourable Member for Sutton and Cheam on finally getting his dearest wish granted and seeing this come to fruition. Perhaps I'm overstating the reality there, but he has played a part here as well, also with the private member's bill. My honourable friend from Vauxhall, I mean, when she was extolling the virtues of Westminster Bridge, I did wonder if she was going to start quoting William Wordsworth. Earth has not anything to show more fair, as of course everybody undoubtedly is well aware, but perhaps pedicabs spoil the view very slightly in that regard. And she made very, very good points about the threats to tourists, the importance of safety for passengers, and indeed for drivers that are included in the legislation. She and a number of other members have mentioned the noise nuisance as well. And then my parliamentary twin, he and I do indeed share the same date of birth, finished the debate with what I would loosely describe as an occasional dose of over-disclosure, possibly, about his own past, but made a very good case for the legislation as well. I think we had disagreement for the member for Christchurch, who seemed to think we were on a Friday, and that he was carrying out his characteristic approach of talking out a private member's bill, which, of course, is why, as the Minister pointed out, it was one of the reasons why we are here and the government has had to finally bring this forward. I will indeed give way.
Well, I think the honourable gentleman is being a little unfair to my friend from Christchurch. He makes a good point, I think, about us trying to understand where this may go. And it might be useful for the House to know that, as I understand it, the honourable member was asking for a sense of where licensing would go. As I understand it, TfL did publish a framework for licensing and pedicabs back in 2022, and it might be helpful for the Minister when we get to committee for that to be circulated to members.
Well, look, I am grateful to him for the intervention. I mean, I think the wider point is that the member for Christchurch was raising things that really do belong at committee stage, and he will have a chance, as he admitted, because it will be a committee of the whole House, to indeed raise the point that his honourable friend has just reiterated. But it is good news that the legal loophole will be closed that exempts pedicabs from being defined as taxis under current law, leaving pedicabs as the only form of unregulated public transport in London. And my honourable friend from Wakefield set out the views of this party about the reasons why this is so important. He addressed the cases of overcharging. We have had TfL's own evidence of collisions resulting in personal injury involving pedicabs, 24 driver incidents between 2018 and the end of August 2023, for example, including road obstruction, driver conduct, and which includes 6 sexual offences. I think all of these demonstrate why it is so important that action is taken to regulate, alongside the cases that we heard about overcharging and indeed noise nuisance. So, look, we have an important opportunity here to improve the safety of passengers, of all road users in central London, to add to the tourist economy, and to strike the right balance between the enjoyment that pedicabs can offer and the protection of the public. Today's debate does beg the question of when the government plans to bring forward its long-promised transport bill, which is wide-reaching, extends beyond London, and includes regulations on further neglected issues such as e-scooters and e-bikes. But for today, this legislation on pedicabs is long overdue, and I look forward to the bill progressing through the House.
Minister Guy.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With the leave of the House, I having opened the bill, I will, with the leave of the House, close this debate, which has been a short but occasionally feisty and certainly interesting journey down memory lane of the experiences by all colleagues who have endeavoured to bring this legislation before this House and to pass it in previous occasions, and I congratulate previous colleagues who have attempted to do private members' bills, and clearly we have learnt an awful lot as well about certain individual members. I enjoyed the honourable gentleman from North West Hampshire, who probably has a T-shirt, obviously created in Soho, that says, "I was louche in my youth." The long and the short of it is, though, he makes very good and fair points that even though we are all, I genuinely believe, economically liberal and wanting to see a thriving, bustling, entrepreneurial London, there has to be some degree of order and a fair playing field across all forms of transport. And there is a legitimate issue in terms of crime and the way in which this city is perceived if we do not take action, and it is right on a cross-party basis that we are taking such action. I thank all particular colleagues. I won't go through them in detail. The fair point was made on noise, having spent the best part of a month of my life in St Thomas's Hospital, and having experienced the impact of the noise outside it, and having met many of the representatives of hotels, of businesses, of restaurants, of the theatres, who are genuinely concerned at the unregulated noise that is being provided by some of these operators, sadly. And the fair point is also made that there are people, we need to have a living, breathing, residential city of London. And without that, if one has unregulated noise, that is just simply not possible. And people are literally moving out because of this particular problem. That is not acceptable. My honourable friend from Christchurch made legitimate and genuine points, which is entirely right, starting from the fundamental principle, what is the end objective here? And I think that is a totally legitimate thing, and we should not in any way decry his robust attempt to get to the heart and soul of those particular points, and I welcome that. I will very much take on board the efforts he wishes me to make to allay his concerns prior to the committee stage. I will put a couple of points on the record, as my honourable friend from North West Hampshire made clear in his brief remarks, that TfL have produced a outline in January 2022 of potential licensing framework, which is in excess of 10 pages. Clearly, it would have to be refreshed by reason of the fact that this legislation is coming forward, and, for example, the noise regulations was added in respect of the other place barely weeks ago. There is also the situation that Clause 7 of the bill sets out the requirement of guidance, which is a matter for the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State has given updated best practice guidance for licensing authorities outside of London. He did that in November of last year. That specifically states that where there is a local interest in providing pedicab services, licensing authorities should make adjustments to licensing requirements to accommodate such services. The whole point and the purpose being to make it easier to bring those things in. Now, clearly, it is also, Clause 7 provides a capability for the Secretary of State to bring in such guidance. I endorse the point on e-bikes and e-scooters that clearly enforcement is the key issue on an ongoing basis. I make the final point that this is something that we will debate in committee. I am proposed to write to all of the members who have contributed today, setting out some of those particular points in a bit more detail, and I genuinely commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Programme motion to be moved formally. Move. Question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Money resolution to be moved formally.
Beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Ways and means motion to be moved formally.
I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Thank you.